My hands were on fire, my feet were on fire, my legs were on fire. And this blood was spurting out of my head, thinking I was going to die there.
Naperville resident John Prescott, like many veterans, seldom speaks of his combat experiences. The horrors he faced in World War II were beyond what most can imagine. He started his career in the military when he was just a teenager, living in Downers Grove in 1944.
And I decided that I didn't want to go into the Army, so I arranged to volunteer for the Navy. And my friend Harry Lehman and I were together. We left Downers Grove on the train and got into Chicago, and I was shoved into the Army. And I said, I enlisted in the Navy. What happened? We need you in the Army. Actually, literally shoved.
From there, Prescott and Lehman eventually made it to Camp Blanding, Florida for 17 weeks of training. The two graduated from basic training on November 30th, 1944. Prescott returned to Downers Grove to spend time with his family before being shipped overseas for assignment.
My father got me down to the Downers Grove Depot to get on the train to start for my overseas assignment. I remember being hugged by him, and he was in tears, which I'd never seen before in my life. He'd already sent two sons in the service.
Initially expecting deployment to the Pacific Theater, Prescott was instead sent to the staging center at Fort Meade, Maryland, where he met 29-year-old Ken Sauby, his one real friend from the war. The two waited a week before being shipped overseas.
I think it took 6 days to get there from New York to Glasgow, Scotland. We got off the ship there and then a train, and then a smaller ship to cross the canal. I got sick on that too. The Lord was telling me, you see, John, that's why we didn't want you to go in the Navy.
Prescott, excited to be on land, arrived in Le Havre, France on January 7th, 1945.
I was going through the chow line, and the guy who was handing out the food was asking everybody, where are you from? And I usually said Chicago. And this time I said Downers Grove, Illinois. He said, oh yeah, do you know Darlene Strong? So no, do I know Darlene? Yes, I know Darlene. She gave me my very first kiss.
Years later, Prescott was able to share that story with Darlene Strong. From here, however, his experiences in the war only intensified. Prescott was assigned to the 1st Platoon of Company C of the 50th Mechanized Infantry Battalion, 6th Armored Division. Prescott's battalion played a critical role in winning the Battle of the Bulge. At the end of January, the men helped hold the line along the Ore River between Luxembourg and Germany. On the morning of February 21st, Prescott and his company received half a day of training on how to clear enemy bunkers. Later that afternoon, they were ordered to cross into Germany, and Prescott was ready to be the first group across the line.
The object was to attack these concrete bunkers, and the plan is the engineers would bring up a supply of dynamite on an A-frame, and three riflemen will go up with them, and the riflemen will give constant fire into the slots in the bunkers. And who gets to be one of the riflemen was John Prescott. All I could think of was that I'm going to be dead in just a few more minutes. When suddenly, way to the left, end of our line, comes this truck with a microphone on it, a megaphone, and it goes down, it goes right in back of us It's speaking German, sending this loud message up to the bunkers. And can you believe, all of a sudden some German soldiers come out of the bunkers with white flags, anything white that they could wave, and surrendered. This I determined as the luckiest day of my life.
On February 26th, Company C received new orders to pass through the village of Lüneburg, Germany, and cross the Prüm River on the other side.
And I was in a ditch waiting to see what other orders might come out. Jimmy Tambura was behind me. He said, "Why don't we get in that house ahead?" And I remember feeling, I don't know, we're not being touched by any of this firepower. But against my better judgment, I went ahead and I crawled up to the doorway of this house. I yelled out for Sabi. "Sabi, are you in there?" He said, "Yeah, we're all in here. Come on in." And I got up in a crouch and got into 1 foot into the doorway, and it blew up. They had, I don't know how many booby traps or bombs that they had were able to detonate at that moment, but it was a terrific explosion. I was not cognizant. I must have been knocked out for a while. And I'm sitting there in the doorway with all this firepower still blasting. I had my glove off because my hands were on fire, my feet were on fire, my legs were on fire. And this blood was spurting out of my head. I thought, uh-oh, Mom is really going to be mad at you guys, thinking I was going to die there. And then I heard Sabi. Sabi was out in the road. It crawled over me somehow. Had gotten out and was lying in the road yelling for help. I had to do something. And I yelled back at him that I'm going back. I'll try to get help. And I got back in that ditch without any further wounds and crawled back about 100 yards. I never saw Ken again. That was our last message.
Prescott was transported to an aid station where surgeons removed shrapnel from his hands and feet and pulled a .25 caliber bullet from his face. He couldn't walk for 10 days after the operation, and from February to May of 1945, Prescott stayed in Europe to recover. Once back in the States, he and his childhood best friend Harry Lehman received Purple Hearts for being wounded in combat. Prescott then stayed in the Army until he was discharged in July of 1946. But for 53 years, Prescott never knew if Ken Sabi made it back alive from that dark night in Lüneburg. He never talked about his combat experiences until he opened up to his son Rob in 1998. It was the first time the Prescott family had even heard of Sabi. Rob found that he did survive that night in Lüneburg and lived until 1976.
I would like to think that when I think back to those days, the experiences that not just me, but World War II, I was one of 16 million people in uniform. How we were deployed against so much of the world gives me a patriotic feeling that I was part of such a fantastic effort. I fly that flag with much pride.
When he got out of the service, Prescott went to college. Like all wartime veterans, he did his very best to readjust to civilian life.
You know, I grew up in Downers Grove, and when I got back from service, I found the only college I could get into was at North Central College. And that was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me, I think. I met the woman that I married, and Naperville became my town. And it's been that way ever since.
Despite the scars of his past, he and his wife Elizabeth raised all 5 children in Naperville. Prescott's resilience was not just in surviving the war, but also in building a life filled with purpose and love. For Naperville News 17, I'm Joe Kennedy.